Welcome to the 3-day national webinar organized by the Department of History Martoma College Tiruvalla on the theme Contagion Past and Present. The webinar is conducted from 31st of July to 1st of August. Today is day 3 of the webinar. The topic of today's discussion will be pandemics and the history of contagionism. Welcome to the 3-day national webinar organized by the Department of History Martoma College Tiruvalla on the theme Contagion Past and Present. The webinar is conducted from
in Sparta, the Peloponnesian War. Some of you would be knowing about this war. So an epidemic destroyed the people of Athens and it lasted for 5 years. Some estimates they put the death toll as high as 1 lakh. The Greek historian Thucydides, students of history would be knowing that he's known as the father of scientific history. He wrote that people in good health were all of a sudden attacked by violent heats in the head and redness and inflammation in the eyes, the throat, the tongue. They were becoming bloody and they were emitting an unnatural and a very smelly breath. So what exactly this epidemic was has been a source of debate among many scientists. Many scholars believed that overcrowding because of the war between Athens and Sparta was the reason. Of course, what happened in the war was, you know that Sparta's army was stronger, so the Athenians were forced to take refuge behind a series of fortifications. And finally, despite the epidemic, the war continued until 404. Athens was forced to yield to Sparta. So that was a plague of Athens. Now coming to the third one, the Antonine plague. Which attacked Rome in 165 AD. So many historians believe that the epidemic was first brought into the Roman Empire by soldiers who were returning home after a war against Sparta. So when soldiers returned to the Roman Empire, they not only brought back spoils of war, they also brought the plague to Rome. So it killed over 5 million people in Roman Empire. And this epidemic also resulted in the end of the Roman peace, which is the Pax Romana, which was a period from 27 BC to 180 AD. So Rome was at the height of its power then. So after 180 AD, there was instability throughout the Roman Empire, and it had more civil wars, especially invasions by barbarians. Now coming to the fourth plague, the plague of Cyprian, which also attacked Rome. It was named after Saint Cyprian, a bishop of Carthage in Tunisia, who described the epidemic as the end of the world. And this plague is also estimated to have killed about 5,000 people a day in Rome. And in 2014, archaeologists in Luxor found what appears to be a mass burial site of plague victims. You can see the skulls, etc., of the victims there. And their bodies were covered with thick layer of lime. Historically, lime was used as a disinfectant. Even now we use lime as a disinfectant, isn't it? So archaeologists found 3 furnaces used to manufacture lime, and the remains of the plague victims were burned in a giant bonfire. Coming to the 5th plague, plague of Justinian, which I had mentioned to you earlier, the Byzantine Empire was attacked by the bubonic plague, which marked the end of the beginning of the decline of the empire, in fact. The plague reoccurred continuously afterwards. About 10% of the world's population died. And the plague is, of course, named after the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. And during his reign, you can see his picture there. And during his reign, the Byzantine Empire reached its peak. And it had a territory which extended from from the Middle East to the Western Europe. And later, you know that after the plague, the Byzantine Empire declined. Now coming to the next epidemic, which was the Black Death. The Black Death is also known as pestilence or the Great Mortality. It is considered to be the most fatal pandemic recorded in human history. It traveled from Asia to Europe, leaving devastation in its wake. Some people say that nearly half of Europe's population was wiped out. And it was caused by the bacteria Yersinia pestis that is extinct today, and it was spread by fleas on infected rodents like rats, squirrels, etc. The bodies of victims were buried in mass graves. So this bubonic plague changed the course of Europe's history in the sense so many people died. So labor became very hard to find, and so workers had to be paid more money, and this in turn led to the end of slavery in Europe. So the workers had better access to food, etc. So this lack of cheap labor, which resulted due to the Black Death, might have even led to technological innovations later. You can see the picture there, the infected people having swollen nodes all over their body, and a person a holy man is trying to cure them from their disease. Next, we have smallpox. Smallpox was found in Europe, Asia, and Arabia for centuries, and it killed nearly 3 out of 10 people and left the others with scars, especially on their faces. The smallpox virus arrived in the 15th century only with the first European explorers. The indigenous people of modern day Mexico and the US had natural zero immunity to smallpox. Later on, smallpox became the first virus epidemic to be ended by a vaccine. You can see the picture there. In the late 18th century, a British doctor named Edward Jenner, he discovered that milkmaids who were infected with a milder virus, which was a cowpox virus, they were all immune to the smallpox. So what he did was he inoculated, this doctor, Edward Jenner, he inoculated his gardener's 9-year-old son with cowpox. But it took nearly 2 centuries more. Maybe in 1980, the World Health Organization announced that smallpox has been completely eradicated from the earth. Even in and around us, we find people, especially elderly people, some of them having scars on their faces, which is, of course, the after effect of the smallpox. Next, we have the Cocolizzi epidemic, the 8th epidemic, which struck Mexico and Central America from 1845 to 1548. Sorry, 1545 to 1548. The infection that caused the Cocolizzi epidemic was a form of viral hemorrhagic fever that killed around 15 million inhabitants of Mexico and Central America. So among a population already weakened by extreme drought, this disease proved to be very devastating and severe. So the word Cocolizzi is the Aztec word for the term pest. So a recent study that examined DNA from skeletons that were found from infected people found out a subspecies of Salmonella, which actually caused the fever. Then this fever caused dehydration and gastro and intestinal problems. And this is still a major health threat nowadays, even today. Next, we have the American plagues of the 16th century, the 9th plague, the American plagues. So the American plagues are a cluster of Eurasian diseases brought to the Americas, that is North and South America, by the European explorers, previously known as Latin America. So these illnesses contributed to the collapse of the 2 major civilizations, the Inca and the Aztec civilization. Some say that about 90% of the indigenous population was killed there. So the disease helped the Spanish explorer Hernan Cortes to conquer the Aztec capital in 1590. Another Spanish force led by Francisco Pizarro conquered the Incas in 1532. Spain took over the territories of both the Aztec and the Inca empires. And in both the cases, the Aztec and the Inca armies, they were badly affected by the epidemic and they were unable to withstand the Spanish forces. So later, what happened? The British, the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch, all of them started exploring Latin America and conquering the area. But they were held by the fact that this disease had vastly reduced the indigenous population living in that area. Now coming to the next, the Great Plague of London, 1665 to 1666. So the Black Death's large major outbreak in Britain caused a great moving from London, which was led by King Charles II. The plague started in April 1665 and it spread rapidly during the hot summer months. The fleas from plague affected rodents, squirrels, rats, etc. were one of the major causes of the transmission. So by the time the plague ended, more than 1 lakh of people had died, especially 15% of the population at least had died. And you can see the picture of the plague doctor of those times, with this particular robe, with the mask, which resembled the beak and the bird and the hat, and with the glove and all fully protected plague doctors. He also had a stick in his hand so that he didn't touch the patient. So the plague doctor, of course. And then you can see the picture on the right, the Great Fire of London. So even after the plague, not even after, I would say that the plague, when it ended, London had to witness another major incident, which was a Great Fire, which lasted for 4 days. That happened in 1666, and it burned down a large portion of the city. Now, coming to the 11th plague of Marseille in France. Historical records say that the Great Plague of Marseille started when a ship called Grand Saint Antoine reached this port of Marseille, carrying a cargo of goods from the Mediterranean. Although the ship was quarantined, the plague somehow got into the city, and mainly through rodents. And the plague spread very quickly, and over the next year, 1 lakh of people had died in Marseille and in the surrounding areas. And around 30% of the population of Marseille is said to have perished in this epidemic. Next, coming to the 12th one, the Russian plague, 1770 to 72. In Russia, the plague struck Moscow and other cities. Along with this, you find the terror of the quarantined citizens erupted into violence, just like how even in the present times, people who are not willing to stay in quarantine, how they act violently against the government and the police. So there also, people erupted in violence and riots spread across the city. And it ended with the murder of Archbishop Ambrose, who was encouraging crowds not to gather for worship. So the Empress of Russia, you can see her picture there, Catherine II, known as Catherine. She was so desperate to contain the plague and restore public order that she issued a proclamation ordering all the factories to be removed from Moscow. So by the time the plague ended, many people had died. And even after the plague ended, Catherine struggled to restore order in Russia. So in 1773, Peter III, who was Catherine's executive husband, he led a violent movement that led to, again, the death of so many people, thousands of people in Russia. Now coming to Philadelphia yellow fever epidemic of 1793. This yellow fever is an acute viral hemorrhagic disease transmitted by infected mosquitoes. So when yellow fever seized the then capital of US, that is Philadelphia, officials wrongly believed that the African slaves were immune to it. So as a result, they were recruited to nurse the sick. But the epidemic spread, and the disease increased greatly, especially during the hot and humid summer weather in Philadelphia. But when the winter came, the mosquitoes died out, and then the epidemic ended. But then more than 5,000 people had died. Now coming to the 14th one, the cholera. In the early to the mid-19th century, cholera spread in England, initially killing thousands of people. The prevailing scientific theory was that the disease was spread by foul air known as miasma. But a British doctor, you can see him there, John Snow, he suspected that the origin of the mysterious disease which killed victims even during the initial days of its spreading was not in the foul air, but it was in London's impure drinking water. And in 1849, John Snow proposed that cholera was a contagious disease. The Snow's efforts didn't cure cholera immediately, but it eventually led to a global effort to improve urban sanitation and to protect drinking water from contamination. We know, all of us now know the importance of drinking pure water, isn't it? So, which will definitely keep us away from many diseases. So while cholera has largely been eradicated in many developed countries, it is still a killer disease in developing countries like India, which lack adequate sewage treatment and also access to clean drinking water. Next is the 15th pandemic is the flu pandemic, 1889 to 1890. In the modern industrial age, new transport facilities made it easier for these influenza viruses to spread and to create danger. In just a few months, this flu pandemic, it spread all over the globe, killing around 1 million people. And it took just 5 weeks for the epidemic to reach its peak mortality. So the earliest cases were reported in Russia. The virus spread throughout St. Petersburg, and then it came to Europe, and then it spread to the rest of the world. Coming to the American polio epidemic of 1916. A polio epidemic started in New York City, and there were about 27,000 cases initially and around 6,000 deaths in the US. The disease, polio, usually affects children, and sometimes it leaves the survivors with permanent disabilities, handicaps. President Roosevelt was diagnosed with polio in 1921 at the age of 39. You can see the statue of Roosevelt there. And this polio epidemic occurred occasionally in the US, and it killed thousands of people until the vaccine, the Salk vaccine, was developed. You can see the picture, the vaccine being inoculated, and then the cases started declining. So the last polio case in the US was reported in 1979. Now worldwide vaccination efforts have greatly reduced the disease, although we know that it has not been completely eradicated. We all know of the pulse polio programs of our government, where polio drops are being given to the young infants when they are born, etc. So in spite of these pulse polio program, etc., we find a lot of people among us victims of polio with physical handicaps. Next, we have the Spanish flu, which we are commemorating the 100 years of the coming of the Spanish flu now. It estimated 500 million people died, and 1/5 of those died with some indigenous communities were pushed away to extinction. It was really miserable because it was during the same time that the First World War was going on towards the end. So soldiers were affected, and to add with this, the epidemic, the war was going on. So despite the name Spanish flu, we know that this flu actually did not start in Spain. But Spain was a neutral country during the First World War, and it did not enforce strict censorship on its press. So it could freely publish early accounts of this disease. So as a result, people falsely believe that it was in Spain that this epidemic started, and so this name Spanish flu struck. So what was the kind of non-pharmaceutical interventions that took place during the Spanish flu, that is 100 years back? Closing down of education institutions were there. Then we find, because students are very effective in spreading the virus, then there was timely closing down of school, cancellation of public gathering, public sports, closing down of markets, and all this was associated with this pandemic. So there was no there was no vaccine to protect against this influenza in this infection. Also, there were no antibiotics to treat the bacterial infections. So the only interventions that were done during those times were, isolation, quarantine, the maintenance of public hygiene. Then there was a use of disinfectants, etc. They were applied universally. You can see the picture of a notice during those times. Some of you might have seen this already. So how a notice was given in 1980, November 7, ordering all schools, public and private churches, theaters, moving picture halls, pool rooms and other places to be closed until further notice. And an advertisement, a very interesting advertisement on the left-hand side, like how, people in quarantine, in order to while away their time, they were asked to use the bell telephone, because using the bell telephone would make them cheerful and they could speak to their relatives, etc. So some of the posters of those period. Now the 18th pandemic would be the Asian flu from 1957 to 1958, which started in China. So this disease also claimed about 1 million lives. So the virus of the pandemic was a blend of avian flu viruses, the H2N2 virus. It is said to have originated in mild, it said it originated due to the mutation in mild ducks. So this disease rapidly spread to Singapore, then it was reported in Hong Kong and in US in the same year, in 1957. And there was a huge death toll of more than 1.1 million worldwide. And also more than 1 lakh of people died in the US alone. Then we have the 1968 pandemic, the Hong Kong flu. It was caused by the H3N2 virus, a new H3 gene, which was from the 1957 H2N2 virus. So it was first noticed in the US. You can see the people wearing masks there. And the number of deaths was more than 1 million worldwide and about 1 lakh in the US also. And then most of the deaths happened among people who were more than 65 years old. And this H3N2 virus still continues to circulate worldwide as a seasonal influenza. Next, you have the AIDS pandemic, the 20th pandemic, AIDS pandemic and epidemic. And it became a global pandemic in the 1980s. And it has claimed an estimated 35 million lives. And HIV, which is a virus which caused the AIDS, is likely it developed from a chimpanzee virus that was transferred to humans in the late 20th century, in the 1920s. So this virus made its way into the world, and now around 64% of the estimated population of about 40 million people living in the Saharan Africa are said to be having this, the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. For decades, the disease had no cure, but now medication has developed and it allows people with the disease to experience a normal life after treatment. And we have cases of a few people getting cured of this disease in this early 2020 also. Next, coming to the SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome. This also developed in China. It's said to have started with bats initially, spread to cats and then to humans in China. It later affected around 30 countries through, definitely it would be the global air traffic. And it infected people through respiratory drops from coughs and sneezes. And massive quarantine efforts contained the virus, and China was criticized in 2003 for trying to suppress information about the virus at the beginning of the outbreak. It's exactly the same situation we have now. China is criticized even now for having suppressed the spread of the COVID-19. It also waked up, this SARS also worked as a wake-up call to improve responses worldwide, keeping diseases like H1N1, which was to come later, then Ebola, and also Zika under control. Coming to the H1N1 swine flu pandemic, the 22nd pandemic, which began in 2009. And this was caused by a strain of H1N1 that originated in Mexico in the spring of 2009 before it spread to the rest of the world. In 1 year, it infected more than 1.4 million people and killed more than 1 lakh of people worldwide. So this swine flu primarily affected children and young adults, and 80% of the deaths were in people younger than 65. Why was that? This was unusual, maybe because that was unusual because most strain of flu viruses, including that of seasonal flu, cause the highest percentage of death in people above 65. But in the case of swine flu, it was different. Older people might have got immunity to the H1N1 virus group. And so the H1N1 swine flu pandemic mostly affected young people and also the adults. You can see how this virus can, this flu can pass from humans through contact that affects pigs. Yes. It can pass to humans through air contamination. Yes. Now coming to the next one, the West African Ebola epidemic, 2014 to 2016. This affected West Africa between 2014 and 2016, and there were about 28,600 cases and more than 11,000 deaths. The first case was reported in Guinea, and then the disease quickly spread to Sierra Leone and then Liberia. So majority of the deaths and cases occurred in these three countries, that is Sierra Leone, then Guinea and Liberia. So a smaller number of cases occurred in other African countries like Nigeria, Mali, Senegal, and later it spread to US and the Europe. There's no cure for Ebola, although efforts are being conducted for finding a vaccine for Ebola. Next, we have the Zika virus. The 24th epidemic I would like to tell you about is the Zika virus epidemic, which started in 2014. So scientists are trying their best to bring the virus under control. The Zika virus is usually spread through mosquitoes of the Aedes genus, and it can also be sexually transmitted in humans. While Zika is usually not harmful to adults or children, it can attack infants in the womb, and it can cause birth defects. You can see the picture there. Zika virus is primarily spread through the bite of infected mosquitoes, and it can be transferred from mother to baby through sexual activity also, and also it can be transmitted through blood transfusion. And yes, the type of mosquito that carries Zika flourish best in warm and humid climates, making South America, Central America, and parts of US prime areas for this epidemic to flourish. So with that, I've traced most of the epidemics historically. Yes. I would stop sharing my slide and come to the final part of my presentation. Yes. So we know that a solution to the pandemic has not been achieved yet. There is no vaccine. We haven't got a vaccine yet. But so many changes have come up in the present life world. Revolutionary changes have come. When we look through a social scientific lens, there have been many changes in the social metrics. So this connection of history as a discipline from the past is being reflected at the present also. So we know that there will be pandemics in future. Now we have the COVID-19, and there is going to be more pandemics in future too. But certain inferences can be made through observations of the contemporary society. So the first would be the masked world. The entire world has become a masked one. So it has become very normal now, isn't it, all over the world, irrespective of the state systems, capitalist or communist. You can't identify a person if he or she comes to you without a mask. You can't identify, isn't it? So, but you know, if a person comes with a mask, if he's a stranger, you cannot identify him. But if a person comes in front of you without wearing a mask, we are fearful. But a person with a mask has a very different kind of meaning in the present society. The mask has become a new cultural statement now. We are forced to wear the mask, isn't it? When we go outside, at least. So we, with our mask, we respect each other mutually. We know that with our masks, we are here to defeat the virus. So just to show you what I have yes, the masked world, everyone in masks. And then there are different kinds of masks available in the markets now, isn't it? We have the designer masks, we have the medical masks, you know, which are disposable. We have the cloth masks. So masks have become a cultural artifact now. We also have the studio marks. There's a studio in Kottayam, I believe, where you go take a picture of yours and then you get your nose and your mouth imprinted on the mask. And so anybody would identify you with the mask. So once upon a time, the masks, they were used to malign, they were used to segregate, they were used to separate. The mask, a person with a mask was considered to be a double-faced person or an evil. But now masks have a very different meaning in the present world. Now, social distancing, I don't have to tell you about it. More than this, it is physical distancing that we are maintaining. So in the pre-COVID times, we had intensive social integration. There were so many celebrations of marriage, festivals, etc. But now we are all in confinement. Who is celebrating now? The virus, of course. The virus is celebrating. Calendars are there in front of us with no meanings. Schedules have no meaning nowadays. We don't even see timetables. Timetables have become irrelevant now. They're just past documents which help us see how our past used to be, isn't it? This is a picture of a market area in North India where people are maintaining social distancing while buying vegetables. So even distances have lessened now, like how people are walking thousands of kilometers to reach their homes. The poor highway citizens, the daily wage laborers, the migrant laborers. So apart from global citizens, so we have these highway citizens who are going back to their homes. Teachers have also become distant from students, isn't it? Now online classes have become the fashion. And what is the third point I would like to make here is the quarantine, which is a historical word, of course. Human bodies are segregated. None of us like quarantine. But this word has resurfaced a deep historical legacy. We know that the word has its origin from ancient times. The word began in the 14th century. That is, it was used in order to protect coastal cities from plague epidemics. The cautious port authorities required ships which were coming to Venice in Italy from infected ports to remain at anchor for about 40 days before landing. So the origin of the word quarantine is from the Italian quaranto giorni, which means 40 days. But now quarantine is only 14 days. In between, there was the Trentine also, where 30 days was prescribed for isolation. Yes, so to connect to all this, confinement, we know that is the worst thing that can happen to anyone. We are all confined now. But there's a positive side to this. Ideas usually come to us when we are in confinement. History also has proved that. We know that great works have been written while in confinement. Example, Machiavelli wrote his Prince while in confinement. Events have become very important in history. Sometimes events do become important. So a virus has influenced our lives now, and this pandemic has paused human civilization. Suddenly, one day we are in search of masks, we are in search of sanitizers. So the present pandemic has been one of the greatest events in the 20th century, and it has created a new orientation and a new metrics also. But once a vaccine is invented, the crisis is gone. So I would like to mention to you about 4 contagions which has been triggered during this pandemic. What are those 4 contagions? The information contagion, the economic contagion, then the psychology contagion, and the behavior contagion. What is information contagion? We have a contagion of both good and bad information about the virus. There is also the epidemic of jokes. So we need to manage this, I would say, the infodemic by encouraging only true information about the COVID-19. Also, learnings from other countries' experience, also effective treatment options, and so on, so that individuals make better decisions. So that is the information contagion. Now, what is the economic contagion? The economic contagion of which the financial and the stock market slump is a leading indicator. This is already causing a lot of policy challenges, and we know that this is not going to end in the near future. So that is the economic contagion. Now, the psychological contagion, which is the most severe, the psychology of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that is contagious. Now, there is an intense consciousness, a collective emotion, a new cultural emotion, I would say, the world. Fear. The medieval world was unified over the cultural evolution of fear, the plagues. In the modern times, this fear is now the fear of the virus, not the bacteria. That's only difference. So there is no class distinction in this universal evolution of fear. The virus doesn't see whether we are rich, poor, healthy, or unhealthy when it attacks us. Also, there's a proliferation of online classes. What is the fear here? We teachers are also in fear now. What is the fear? We fear the technology involved here. Also, now we have to fear the surveillance of the parents also. Before, we used to take our classes very freely in front of our students. Now we are fearing the parents or the relatives of the students who are watching us closely. So that fear is also there. Now, the third contagion would be the behavioral contagion. There is a contagion of human behavior too. What is that? The good part and the bad part. What is the good part? The washing of hands, working from home, etc. What is the bad part? That is isolating victims, unnecessarily attacking them, avoiding screening measures, escaping quarantine, stocking of medical supplies, all these other, I would say, the behavioral contagion. But now, the state has emerged as a savior now. We find a recovered image of the state. We have also the police. They are surveilling us nowadays. There is enforced discipline. We don't like being in a discipline. Our fundamental rights are taken away now. But then there is no other go. We have to endure this in order to control the virus. Devices are used to detect people and infection. Health workers, of course, are heroes. And public healthcare system is glorified. And governments are using different kinds of mechanism to spread to check the spread. Also, we find music and other art forms have become a therapy to overcome the fear factor. You find many people now coming in social media, singing songs, that is presenting their paintings, etc. Because, all these are overcoming our fear. We are practicing different hobbies now. Films are there. We have the Amazon Prime, the Netflix. All these are being enjoyed by us. But one thing is there, only few can enjoy them because only few have access to those. There are new medical systems emerging. Indigenous medical approaches have come. So this pandemic, usually, in all these pandemics, they teach us that what is more important for us is not globalization. It is global integration. That we are seeing now, isn't it? The interdependency of human civilization. We have become global citizens. The COVID-19 pandemic is a global phenomenon. All of us are affected. So what is the good part? There are no religious conflicts now. In fact, you might have seen how people of different religions are coming together to pray so that the doctors, the scientists, all are given extra strength to deal with this present situation. So relationships have become genuine. The family bonding has become very strong. We ourselves have started realizing who we are. We have started learning to be self-sufficient without our domestic help. We are trying to maintain our home, the domestic situations. We are trying to become more healthy by practicing yoga, etc. Better lifestyles. New tools are available to us. So we are all become digital now. We are working remotely, just like the webinar which is going on. So also we are giving extra care for the vulnerable. So we have more time to think. Previously, we were all running behind schedules. We were all running we were trying to attend seminars, conferences, busy meetings, etc. But now we are all at home. Most of us are at home, lockdown, etc. So pandemics are actually lessons for us, isn't it? So, the government is now putting a lot of restrictions. You should not attend marriages, festivals. But can't we correct ourselves? We can correct ourselves, of course, in future without restrictions from the government by making our celebrations simple. We need to realize that it's the over-ambitious nature of humans that has, in a way, led to the pandemic. Now, coming to my concluding slide, which I would like to just show you and wind up my talk. Yes. Pandemics are, of course, historical pauses. They are neither beginning nor end, especially the present COVID-19. It is a passing phase, but it is a lesson for us to think how we should be in future. There is confinement in spite of all advancements. We have all the advancement, latest technology, new platforms, Google Meet, we have the Zoom, we have so many coming our way, and then to conduct webinars, and then we have so many digital mechanisms, but then we are all confined. Vulnerability of the poorer sections, that is a dichotomy which is very evident. We find that some of us who are getting a steady income, we are all enjoying in a way, like we are trying out new recipes in our kitchens, and we are having quite a steady income for which we should be thankful. But what about the other people, the marginalized, the daily wage earners who are jobless? So this dichotomy is very evident during this pandemic. Are humans the only issue? No. Some would say that human beings are responsible for the pandemics. No, it is actually the rationality of the system. Humans are ingrained in the system. They are a part of the system. They have been forced to be in this system, which is, ingrained with the scientific advancements, technology, any of those systems, like capitalist system. So humans are just a link of this entire rationality. We are just a part of it. And finally, our obsession with technology is becoming more and more stronger now with this digital world, because we are all distanced from one another physically, even though we are connected to one another technologically, we find that we are distanced from one another physically. So pandemics are definitely a good pause for you, for me, and for the entire world. And let us learn from this pandemic, and let us try to lead a better life in future. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, your lecture gave us a chronology of the 24 pandemics that preceded COVID-19. Ma'am, actually, your lecture emboldened us to understand that man in his history have faced and defeated many pandemics. And I think it gave us the will to move forward in these testing times. And ma'am, also you took time to speak, though briefly, about mask being a cultural artifact. Yes. And ma'am, I forgot to mention that etymology is one of your forte, but ma'am, you with explaining the roots of words like pandemic and quarantine demonstrated how good you are in etymology, ma'am. And it was also pleasing to hear you from ma'am about infodemics, economic contagion, psychological contagion, and also behavioral contagion. And ma'am, to end, there are many positives that we are taking after this lecture. You spoke of the many ways to express and overcome our fear. You spoke of how the world has become integrated during the era of this pandemic. And ma'am, I think your lecture also reflected upon the dichotomy this pandemic has brought on us. Yes. Ma'am, it was really informative, ma'am. We are quite happy and grateful to have been in this forum with you, ma'am. Thank you once again from the Department of History and all the faculty members and students. And now
Thank you so much.
it's open for discussion and questions.
Sure. Yeah, can you explain the quarantine? Yeah, quarantine, of course, it was practiced from the medieval period onwards, like how social distancing was maintained, crowded areas were avoided in the earlier pandemics, sports were banned, market areas were closed, and then, people were not asked to step out of their houses. So only thing that has changed over these years would be, I think, the sanitizers that we have, I think. Because when I showed you the picture, I forgot to mention to you, the Spanish flu, which occurred 100 years back, the picture that you saw, the black and white picture of the health workers with the masks, treating the patients in tents. Some of the patients were outside. So it is exactly the same picture, but black and white of those times, which we find in the US and in other areas. So when you see the same condition exists in many countries of the world because of lack of space and hospitals and other health and other pharmacies, people are not getting space, so they are treated outside. So it's almost the same. The masks were used. Only thing is we have the sanitizers, I feel. The rest are all almost the same, what we had in the earlier period. Maybe the treatment is very different. The response systems and the way the patients are treated is very different, of course. Any more questions? Drinking hot water and steaming. Definitely, because I'm doing that. Because I'm a person who sings, I'm a singer too. So,
ma'am.
Yes, please, Priya Rajan.
Okay, ma'am. Shall I ask in Malayalam?
തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും ചോദിച്ചോളൂ പ്രിയ.
ഓക്കെ മാം, ഞാൻ ചോദിക്കാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്ന ഇതാണ്, മാമിന്റെ ഒരു അഭിപ്രായമാണ് ചോദിക്കാൻ ആഗ്രഹിക്കുന്നത്. ഇപ്പം COVID-19 ഈ കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ ഒരു സോഷ്യൽ ഡിസ്റ്റൻസ് എന്നത് നിലനിൽക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. സത്യം പറഞ്ഞാൽ ആ കോവിഡ് ബാധിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വ്യക്തിക്ക് ക്വാറന്റൈനിൽ എന്തെങ്കിലും പോകേണ്ടി വരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ അവരെ ഒരു ഡിപ്രഷൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവരോടൊരു സോഷ്യൽ ഡിസ്റ്റൻസ് കാണിക്കുന്നു. അത് വേണം എന്നല്ല, അതല്ല ഞാൻ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. അത് വേണം, പക്ഷേ അവരുടെ മൈൻഡ് അവരെ മാനസികമായിട്ട് തളർത്തുന്ന ഏറ്റവും വലിയ കാര്യം എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ അവരെ അങ്ങ് മാനസികമായി അകറ്റി നിർത്തുന്നു. അഥവാ താനൊരു രോഗിയാണ്, അവരിലൊരു ചിന്ത വീണ്ടും വീണ്ടും ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്നു. ഞാൻ മറ്റുള്ളവരോട് ഇടപെടാൻ പാടില്ല എന്നൊരു ചിന്ത എത്തിക്കുന്നു. അതിലൂടെ അവരൊരു ഡിപ്രഷൻ മൂഡിലേക്ക് പോവുകയാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്.
പ്രിയയുടെ സ്വന്തം ഫാമിലിയിൽ ഇങ്ങനെ എന്തെങ്കിലും കണ്ടിരുന്നോ?
എന്റെ ചേച്ചി ഒരു നേഴ്സ് ആണ്. ചേച്ചിയുടെ ഒരു എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ് ചേച്ചി എന്നോട് പറയുന്നത്, ചേച്ചി എക്സ്പീരിയൻസ് ഷെയർ ചെയ്തത് വെച്ചാണ് പറയുന്നത്. അവർ ഡിപ്രഷൻ മോഡിലേക്ക് പോവുകയാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പം ഒരു രോഗി എന്ന നിലയ്ക്ക് അവരൊരു സപ്പോർട്ട് കൊടുക്കുകയല്ലേ നമുക്ക് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നത്.
ഡെഫിനറ്റ്ലി നമ്മൾ സപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യണം. ഞാൻ മറ്റേ ബിഹേവിയർ കണ്ടേജിയനിൽ പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, ഗുഡ് പാർട്ട് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നമ്മൾ ഒരുപാട് പേരെ സഹായിക്കുന്നു, നമ്മൾ വി ആർ ഫോർഗെറ്റിംഗ് അവർ റിലിജിയൻ എക്സെട്ര. പക്ഷെ അറ്റ് ദ സെയിം ടൈം ഈ വിക്ടിംസിനോടുള്ള നമ്മുടെ കാഴ്ചപ്പാട് ഒരു കുറച്ചുകൂടെ നമ്മൾ മാറ്റേണ്ടിയിരിക്കുന്നു, അല്ലെ? പ്രിയ പറഞ്ഞത് വളരെ ശരിയാണ്. അതാണ്. അപ്പം അവർക്ക് എന്താണ് ശരിക്കും പറഞ്ഞാൽ എന്തോ കൗൺസിലിങ്ങോ അവര് യോഗ ചെയ്യാനോ, പക്ഷെ ഇത് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അവർ ഒറ്റയ്ക്ക് ഇരിക്കുമ്പോഴത്തേക്കും അവർക്ക് ആകപ്പാടെ ഒരു മെന്റൽ ഡിപ്രഷൻ ഡെഫിനറ്റ്ലി. അതുകൊണ്ടാണല്ലോ നമ്മൾ പല സൂയിസൈഡ് കേസസും ഒക്കെ കാണുന്നത്, ബിക്കോസ് ഓഫ് ദിസ്, അല്ലേ? അപ്പം
കഴിഞ്ഞ ദിവസം ഫേസ്ബുക്കിൽ ഒരു ന്യൂസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ഒരു ഗൾഫിൽ നിന്നത്തെ ഒരു ഹസ്ബൻഡ് അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ വൈഫോ മക്കളോ പോലും വിളിച്ചന്വേഷിക്കാതെ നാട്ടുകാർ മരണപ്പെട്ട് ദുർഗന്ധം വന്നതിന് ശേഷമാണ് പുള്ളി മരിച്ചെന്നുള്ളവർ അറിയുന്നത്. കാരണം
ആക്ച്വലി എന്റെ ഹസ്ബൻഡിന്റെ ക്ലാസ്മേറ്റ് തന്നെയാണ്. CET-യില് കോളേജ് ഓഫ് എഞ്ചിനീയറിംഗ് പഠിച്ച അനിൽകുമാറാണ് ഇദ്ദേഹം. അദ്ദേഹം സിംഗപ്പൂരിൽ, അതെ ഈ അനിൽകുമാർ ആക്ച്വലി സിംഗപ്പൂരില്, പക്ഷെ ഹി വാസ് നോട്ട്, പക്ഷെ അങ്ങനെ ഈ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ അതൊരു വലിയൊരു ഇഷ്യൂ ആണ്. കാരണം മനുഷ്യന്റെ ഒരു ഗ്രീഡ് മാത്രമല്ല, മനുഷ്യന്റെ മെന്റാലിറ്റിയാണ് ഇതിൽ കൂടെ കാണുന്നത്, അല്ലെ? നമ്മൾ എത്രത്തോളം ഹെൽപ്ഫുൾ ആണെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാലും when it comes to the real core, അതാണ് ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, ബിഹേവിയർ കണ്ടേജിയൻ, ഗുഡ് പാർട്ട് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ഹെൽപ്പ് ചെയ്യുന്നു എല്ലാവരും, പക്ഷെ അറ്റ് ദ സെയിം ടൈം അപ്പം ഇതിന് നമ്മള് സമൂഹം each one of us should be a little more considerate അല്ലെ. ഇപ്പൊ നമുക്ക് തന്നെ ഇപ്പൊ നമുക്ക് വേറൊരു കോവിഡ് പേഷ്യന്റ് അടുത്ത് പോകാൻ ഭയമായിരിക്കും അല്ലെ. പക്ഷെ ഈ കൊറോണ this COVID-19 is not a very serious disease. Maybe its implications are അത് ഓരോരുത്തരിലും ഓരോ രീതിയിലാണ് വരുന്നതെന്നുള്ള അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് പ്രശ്നം. ഇപ്പൊ ഞാനൊക്കെ ചിലപ്പോ നമുക്ക് തന്നെ കോവിഡ് വന്നിരിക്കാം. നമ്മൾ somebody was asking ഈ hot water കുടിക്കുന്നു, is it good to have hot water? Yes. And ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു ടിപ്പ് I would like to say, like you just boil water with turmeric, മഞ്ഞൾ, ഓമം, പിന്നെ തുളസി ഇല, ചുക്ക് and a little pepper. അപ്പൊ ഇതെല്ലാം കൂടി ഇട്ട് നന്നായിട്ട് ബോയിൽ ചെയ്ത വെള്ളം ഇടയ്ക്കിടയ്ക്ക് കുടിക്കുക. it sip it and it is a very effective preventive for the COVID-19. അപ്പം ഈ ത്രോട്ടിലാണല്ലോ ആദ്യം വൈറസ് എഫക്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പം നമുക്ക് ത്രോട്ടിൽ എന്ത് ഇറിറ്റേഷൻ ഉണ്ടെങ്കിലും we have it, അത് കുറേശ്ശെ ഇങ്ങനെ കുടിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കണം ത്രൂ ഔട്ട് ഒരു ഫ്ലാസ്കിൽ വെച്ചിട്ട്. സോ ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് ഗുഡ്. ആൻഡ് ഇതിന് നമുക്ക് എന്ത് ചെയ്യാൻ കഴിയും പ്രിയ? സോ do you have any suggestion?
മാം, എന്റെ ഒരു അഭിപ്രായത്തില് ഒരു സോഷ്യൽ ഡിസ്റ്റൻസ് എന്തൊക്കെ വന്നാലും അത് വേണ്ടെന്ന് ഞാൻ പറയുന്നില്ല. പക്ഷെ എന്തുകൊണ്ടോ നമുക്ക് അറിയാവുന്ന വ്യക്തികളായിരിക്കും ഇപ്പം ഒരു ക്വാറന്റൈനിൽ പോകുന്നത്, അവരെ ഒന്ന് വിളിച്ചന്വേഷിക്കുക. ഇപ്പൊ കൂടെ അവരുടെ ഇരുന്നില്ലെങ്കിൽ പോലും നമ്മൾ കൂടെ ഉണ്ടെന്നുള്ളൊരു ബോധ്യം അത്
ചെയ്താൽ മതി. അത് ചെയ്താൽ മതി. നമ്മളവിടെ ഫോൺ ചെയ്യുക, അവർക്ക് എന്താ പറയാ എല്ലാ ഫെസിലിറ്റീസും ഉണ്ടാക്കി കൊടുക്കുക, ടു കണക്ട് ടു ദ ഔട്ടർ വേൾഡ് അല്ലെ. ഫോൺ വഴി മൊബൈൽ വഴിയൊക്കെ ദേ ക്യാൻ കണക്ട്. അല്ലാതെ ഇപ്പൊ നമ്മൾ അവിടെ എന്താന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ അവരെ ഫിസിക്കൽ കോണ്ടാക്ട് നമുക്ക് എന്തായാലും വിൽ ബി സ്കെയർഡ് ടു ഡു ഇറ്റ് അല്ലെ.
ഓൾറെഡി ന്യൂസ് കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ കണ്ട് ഓൾറെഡി അവര് പാനിക് ആയിരിക്കും. നമ്മൾ കൂടെ വിളിക്കാതിരിക്കുമ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് അവർ ഡിപ്രഷൻ മോഡിലേക്ക് ഓൾറെഡി പോയി കഴിയും. പിന്നെ അതൊരു സൂയിസൈഡിലേക്ക് കൊണ്ടെത്തിക്കും.
അതാണ് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു. മീഡിയ ഈസ് ഓൾസോ പ്ലേയിങ് എ വെരി ഇമ്പോർട്ടന്റ് റോൾ. ഒരുപാട് ഈ അതാണ് ഇത്രയും ഡെയിലി നമ്മുടെ CM വന്നിട്ട് ഇത്രയും മരണം നടക്കുന്നു എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് അത് കേൾക്കുന്തോറും നമ്മുടെ ആദ്യം കൂടി വരികയാണ് അല്ലേ. സോ ഐ തിങ്ക് the media has a
thank you so much for giving a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much
Priya for your suggestion. Okay. എവിടെയാണ് സിസ്റ്റർ? which hospital is she working in?
പുഷ്പഗിരി മെഡിക്കൽ കോളേജ്, തിരുവല്ല.
Okay. അവിടെ ഒരുപാട് കേസസ് ഉണ്ടോ? കോവിഡ് കേസസ് ഉണ്ടോ?
ഇപ്പോ തുടങ്ങിയതേ ഉള്ളൂ. She is on COVID duty.
Mosquito bite, that's a good question. Mosquito bite could be if not, because contagious diseases or another, it can spread through the air. ഇപ്പോ പറയുന്ന കോവിഡ് എയർ കൂടെ സ്പ്രെഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ്. Mosquito bite കൂടെ സ്പ്രെഡ് ചെയ്യണോ? I'm not very sure of that. If not, is virus not effective through blood? Mosquito bites. So mosquitoes, of course, usually are associated with non-contagious diseases, but like cholera, all these can also be considered as yellow fever. Of course, is a non-contagious disease. If the water used by a COVID person is going to a lake or river, does the water become contaminated? Does it affect the fishes in it? Does it affect the person who eats that fish? I think you should ask a medical doctor this question. If a water used by a COVID person, water used in the sense, if a water used in all, it can be different ways. Is it the same bottle of water that is being thrown to a lake or river? What do you mean? A booster chemistry. Yes, sir. Sir, Priya was asking how, this social distancing, especially, the quarantine victims, they are usually kept in severe isolation. People don't wish to look after their affairs, etc. Especially there are cases when the family, the close family, maybe the wife or the children themselves, remain away from the patient. So is it correct on the part of us to treat patients in such a way? That was a question asked by Priya. I hope Bibu sir is clear now.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, the inoculations and vaccinations that happened in India, like the lymph were taken from the survivors.
Yeah.
And with the notion of purity and pollution that existed in India and still exists in India, how effective do you think, ma'am, inoculations and vaccinations were in India during the 19th century when it began in India?
Inoculations were tested and tried initially, and then it was time tested. Later on, you know how smallpox also was eradicated at a very late stage. But now I think today the papers I read, so many crores of people are waiting for the vaccine to be implemented. In the sense, herd community is a very good preventive herd community. So which is actually it is a preventive which can be spread, over the entire population of India through the vaccine. But then, historically also, a lot of time was taken. That was a factor to time test the vaccine. It was not done. Even the present COVID, the COVID-19 vaccine, even though when it is going to be found out, it will not definitely around 2 to 3 years time will be taken to come into effect, because it has to be tested on, especially with the huge population like India's. It will take definitely a lot of time for the vaccine to have its effect on the people. So herd community is really a solution for the present situation.
Thank you, ma'am. And there is one question in the chat box. It says that the person would like to know about your take on the discussions conducted on the future of capitalist society in the context of COVID-19. Would it be evolved to an era of biocapitalism in a more aggressive manner?
Future of capitalist system, I think it is definitely going to be affected, because with the present economic situation, there's the slump in the market, and then so would it evolve into an era of biocapitalism in a more aggressive manner? Could be. Maybe later on we can expect an era of biocapitalism in future. I would like to know your take on that, Sam sir, Matthew Sam sir. What is your take on that? If you could just share it with me, it would be interesting. Matthew Sam sir.
Ma'am, I told you there is some problem with his Wi-Fi.
Okay.
He won't be able to respond soon.
Maybe he could write it in the chat box.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Samsa, can you come to the chat box and write your opinion?
Biocapitalism.
He's saying that he's formulating his.
Oh, good. So we are expecting his views on the future biocapitalism in an aggressive mode.
Yes, please come up with questions. Others, please come up with questions.
Thank you, sir. We are waiting for your take on the virus as a bioweapon. Yes, bioterrorism, of course, is a very crucial factor nowadays. Even the present COVID, the coronavirus was considered to be a bioweapon, but most of the countries were blaming China for using it. But bioterrorism, of course, is a very serious problem in the present world. It is, especially, that is how I think Sam sir is formulating quite a lengthy one.
Ma'am, one more thing. As you
Yes.
all know, China is being targeted. Like China is seen as a repository of all these viruses from from 3000 BC. You are speaking about cases from 3000 BC. So, ma'am, do you think that it's really China is really a repository of virus, or is it epidemic orientalism that is targeting China too much?
Maybe sort of China targeted China. Maybe the population is a very crucial factor. The overpopulation of the country, and then the market areas. If you would have seen the Chinese market areas, Wuhan and all, how animals are butchered. All these pythons and all these deadly wild animals. They are butchered and they are, they are cut for eating. So all these, actually they might have an effect on the virus to come from there, of course. So China, the role of China, the virus definitely would have started from China. There is no doubt about it. But this would be the reason, like, the wild animals which are being butchered as for meat, and then the very unhealthy market areas, become a breeding place for the virus to spread. And also the present pandemic, we know that how China is accused of not sharing the information about the virus until recently. So that is also, yeah. So I think we just have to wait for the final take on the biocapitalism. Yeah, all the questions are over, I feel.
Ma'am, Subin K is requesting you should mail him his presentation.
Definitely, I'll mail it.
His mail ID.
I'll do one thing. I'll mail it to you so that you can, because I don't think I can. Please note his mail ID so that I can. You can mail it to him. Yeah.
And the house is open for the questions. Please, if somebody has some questions, please come and ask the questions. The expert is here. And in the meantime, I have shared the feedback form. The link is over there. Please use the link to submit your feedback or to program. What could be the best strategies and measures to learn from pandemic and epidemics? Asked by Dr. Y. Yonsna.
Very good question. Best strategies and measure? Yes, to be hygienic, to stay away from others when you're infected, and then to have some sort of a counseling. So in earlier period, there was counseling which was given by counselors, and praying, then in present times also we can use all these strategies. Yoga can be used, meditation, so pranayama. So from past also you find instances like these which really had a check on the spread of the pandemics, So that's it. And then avoiding overcrowding places. Should we wait for Matthew sir? Sam sir, I think he's still.
We will take nothing from him till now. And any more questions? Yes. Anyway, it's time to conclude. So I would like to call upon Neha Haridas, the executive member of the History Association, to deliver the Thanksgiving. Vote of thanks.
A very good evening to one and all. I, Neha Haridas, on behalf of the Department of History, would like to extend our sincere thanks to Professor Agni G.K., Assistant Professor, the Department of History, Marthoma College, who wholeheartedly took the responsibility of chairing today's session. Thank you, sir. I'm extremely delighted to express immense gratitude towards the speaker, Dr. Parvati Menon, Associate Professor of History, All Saints College, Thiruvananthapuram, for spending her valuable time to conduct such an excellent session. Ma'am, thank you very much. I express our sincere thanks to all the delegates who joined us for the seminar and made this a grand success. I also extend our warm regards and respect towards our Honorable Principal, Dr. Verghese Matthew, for his esteemed presence throughout the webinar series, without whom such an initiative would not have been possible. Last but not the least, I express my sincere gratitude towards the HOD and the faculty of the department for bestowing in me the privilege of expressing the word of thanks. Thank you and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Parvati ma'am. Thank you, the faculty members of the department. Thank you for our students and dear delegates who have came from different parts of India. Thank you all, and it's audios from the Department of History. Thank you for making this 3-day webinar a success. Thank you very much.